Will the Committee of Supply please come to order? This section of the Committee of Supply will now resume consideration of the estimates of education. As previously agreed, questioning for this department will proceed in a global manner. The floor is now open for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Altamar.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everybody. So we'll just jump right in, Mr. Minister, and get started. I know today is Friday, and you know, it's wear red for Ed today. You will notice my tie is sort of red. And then later I'll be indicating my support not only for teachers in the province, but for education in the province, and also for a strong support of getting 65% of teachers under contract before too soon, because we have three of the largest labor groups that are still without a contract: Winnipeg School Division, River East Transcona, and Louis Riel. That needs to be taken care of. But let's get right in. Of the $160 million allocated for the K-12 COVID-19 response in the 21-22 budget, the minister mentioned that there was some carryover from the 2021 budget. How much of the $160 million is carryover from last year's budget?
Minister Cullen.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. So to the member's question, out of this year's $160 million, we determined that we're going to be carrying over approximately $78 million. So that's beginning April 1st. So that's 78 million out of the original from last year's budget, 185, pardon me. Again, I just think important to reiterate, out of that 185, we expect to be expending somewhere between 160 and 170 million of that by the end of the school year. Obviously, with the school year not coinciding with our budget year, that makes these respective allocations different. So that's what it is. $78 million carried over into this year's budget of the $160 million.
Mr. Altamar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So to clarify, then, that's $82 million in new government investment?
Minister Cullen?
That would be correct. That's doing the math correctly by my numbers as well. So I guess the premise is we don't obviously we have to budget for this year. Our fiscal year obviously begins April 1st. So that's why we've had to allocate that into this year. And then given the unknowns that we have for COVID going forward, not knowing what the fall situation is going to look like, we did allocate that extra $82 million in this year's budget for a total of 160.
Mr. Altemeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When a layperson hears the term COVID response, they're thinking things like, and I was speaking to my partner last night, and I asked the question, what do you think when you hear COVID response? Her reply to me was, things like PPE, cleaning supplies, maybe the odd piece of infrastructure, depending on, the age and state of a building. But for education, we know that education is a people business, really focused on people development and ensuring that students get the support they need when they need it. So in this COVID response budget, can the minister clarify if that will include human resource allocations for things like, coming out of the pandemic, there will be a tremendous demand on clinical services. Would something like clinical services be considered a COVID-19 response?
Minister Cullen.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. A few things on this particular point. I guess I will say off the top, out of the 185 we did budgeted to date, we spent over $50 million on staffing alone. So clearly, staffing is a priority. I think about 3,500 positions, which include a lot of substitute teachers as well, to support the fight against COVID. So clearly, this year's budget, the 160 that we're talking about, certainly a considerable portion of that will be allocated to staffing. And I certainly appreciate the member's point about recovery learning. We know there's going to be some gaps there. And the longer the students are out of school, the bigger that gap becomes. So clearly, we're going to be doing some catch-up work, and we're going to need resources to help facilitate that catch-up. Clearly, when it comes to clinicians, they will be part of that in terms of the staffing component. And I will say, I should stop and just say right now, we did have a summer school too. It was open to, I think we had about 1,300 students engaged in summer school last year. So that provided a real opportunity for students to catch up on some of the courses that they were lagging behind. We just recently announced that we will be having an additional summer school this year. Again, that will be free to students that want to enroll in that. We are covering some of that costs out of our COVID budget. So that certainly aligns quite well with the recovery learning component. The other thing too, we've got our we have our remote learning center as well up and running, and that's a tremendous resource there. I know the original investment was $10 million. That obviously will be additional resources required out of that $160 million this year as we go forward. That I think has been a good resource for teachers, students, and parents as we go through this, especially given the current state we're in right now. And I believe the member did raise the point about mental health. And clearly we're getting feedback on that side, and we clearly will need to be putting resources into mental health and helping both teachers and students to cope with the situation around the pandemic. So the Remote Learning Center has a component of that in it. There's assistance available there, and we will continue to fund that to make sure that those types of resources are available to both students and staff. In addition, on the mental health front, we did just recently announce some additional money with the support of the new Ministry of Addictions and Mental Health. So obviously there will be more money there, again, to assist students and teachers in terms of dealing with this pandemic.
Mr. Altamare.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make the minister aware that there's going to be a crush of demand for services such as psych assessments, social work. Simply by the very nature of both psych assessment and social work, it's in person is the best part and best way to do that. And so there'll be a crush of demand for that. There'll be a crush of demand for OT and PT services, speech and language, all of those pieces that have been delayed throughout these past few months, simply because we've had to kind of rejig what goes on in school. So I just want to make the minister aware of that so that the department is planning for that. Because I will tell you, this is where all of a number of our schools will be focused on, is how we transition back and what the plan is going to look like. So it's almost, I wouldn't call it fair warning, but it's coming, and it'll be a tsunami, I will tell you that, because working in the system just regularly, it was tremendous demand for services. I can only imagine what it's going to look like when we're coming out of this phase. Not just this 3-week closing to June 1st, but I'm talking about this entire school year that's been really upside down from the get-go. But I do want to get to the fact that we have we have 3 school divisions that have yet to settle contracts. And educators and staff in these divisions are concerned what is going to be happening with their positions, with their remuneration, and how they're going to feel after Bill 45 approaches the passing stage. We are against a provision in this bill that stipulates the employer's ability to pay to come into the arbitration process and for the arbitrator to take that into consideration. And this leaves people anxious, leaves teachers wondering, how valued am I really by this current government, where not only are we mentioning ability to pay in Bill 45, we're doing it in Bill 64. But what is it? So one or the other? Both? Double hammer? And this is what it's being interpreted as. And we want to be able to ensure that agreements are reached before a bill like 45 passes. So my question is, would the minister consider deferring Bill 45 until the 3 largest school divisions in the province come to agreement with their teachers?
I do think, Dana, though, your comments are fine. Okay.
Minister Cullen.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. And I do take the members' points about extra resources being required for staff on the clinical side, for sure. I guess we are having, and we will continue to be having conversations with school boards around that particular issue. Now I'm hoping, and maybe I shouldn't jump to some assumptions or conclusions here, but I guess we better remind school boards that the process around the evaluations and whatever other clinical type work and assessments are required, the one-on-one work that the member referenced, the school board should still be having staff continue to do that, even though we're in a remote learning situation. Again, not all students are remote learning. We still have a percentage that are in class, but those services, irrespective of whether they're in class or out of class, those services should still be available to students. So I think we better remind the school divisions there's still a responsibility that they have, though we're in a new era, a different dynamic here. Those services should still be made available where possible. And we're obviously here to support that. We've committed over $50 million so far this year to additional staff resources. We've set aside $160 million in this year's budget. And I would suggest a lot of that could be used for staffing resources as well. And we'll just have to determine with school boards what that demand is and what it looks like. Clearly, they have a role to play in this in terms of making those types of assessments and what kind of clinical staffing that they do require. So we look forward to having those conversations and continuing those conversations on that. And I take the member's point. In terms of the collective bargaining process, we know it's been underway for quite some time. We as government are not the hiring agency. We're not the ones at the table bargaining. We leave that up to the respective school divisions to do the bargaining with the respective union representatives. Clearly, that's in different stages across the province. Most of the 38 divisions, I believe, are in some form of arbitration. It appears to me that close to 35 of those divisions have actually come to an agreement. So, a lot of that work has been done, and for the most part, those 35 agreements, I think, are very similar in nature. So I'm not going to get into where the arbitration is at in terms of the last. I guess there's potentially 3 school divisions that haven't come to an agreement. We are suggesting that they get out to the table there and work through the arbitration process and make their arrangements. We're not here to dictate what that looks like.
Mr. Altamare.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to remind the minister that if you don't want to interfere in the bargaining process, why are you bringing Bill 45 onto the floor? Why is the ability to pay being mentioned 2 times, and once in 45 and once in 64? That, to me, sends a clear signal that government is involved. And that part makes the bargaining process even more problematic. We saw that in unconstitutional Bill 28, taken to the courts and deemed unconstitutional. And yet here we go again. We're seeing this in 45 and 64. Clear interference. So I want to ask the minister, again, will he allow for a one-time arbitration process to take place, fair and balanced, before Bill 45 reaches royal assent?
Okay.
Minister Cullen.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. This is probably clearly a place where we'll, the member and I are going to probably disagree in principle on this. To me, once Bill 45 reaches royal assent, it's up to the government's purview when that legislation will actually be proclaimed. So the legislation doesn't come into effect until the government decides it will be proclaimed. So I don't see how Bill 45 is interfering with the arbitration process as we see it. I think if the member goes back and actually has a look at what the arbitrator said in the existing arbitration rulings, they did make mention of that provision. So there was certainly talk about it and recognition of it, and clearly this legislation hasn't passed. So I think I would beg to differ on the member's phrasing of this particular situation. So clearly, most of the school divisions have come to an agreement. We'll allow the process to unfold. I think it's unfolding as it naturally does. I mean, we've seen this same process unfold year after year, contract after contract. It's no different. It's just that every time we go through this process, once contracts expire, we go through the same process. We go through 38 processes, bargaining processes, end up in arbitration with basically the same outcomes. So what Bill 45 says, and what MTS has asked for years, is to have provincial-wide bargaining, so that we do have, one agency that we can will be dealing with these contracts. I mean, it's not rocket science. I think it would streamline the process, and clearly the union has been looking for this. We've been listening to the union, and I think that's the process. And again, Bill 45, even though it gets royal assent, will not be proclaimed until the government decides it's the time to proclaim it.
Mr. Altamir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The minister is right. We do have a difference of opinion here. I will just say that, yes, MTS was in favor of provincial bargaining, but no, MTS is not in favor of an unbalanced arbitration process. Teachers gave up the right to strike for a fair and balanced arbitration process when an agreement can't be reached. When a government interferes and interjects itself with legislation that unbalances the arbitration process, questions are going to be asked. And right now, I will say that society is gravely disappointed, as I am, with this particular piece that's in Bill 45 and in Bill 64. Because there is a real possibility that we'll have professional staff that will be going into the new Provincial Education Authority without up-to-date collective agreements. So in that case, if that happens, is there a plan in place for how these educators will be rehired and at what rate of pay they will receive?
Minister Cullen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there is provisions in Bill 64 that will allow for the transition to happen over to the Provincial Education Authority. So we've got 35 out of 38 have agreements at this place in time. So obviously those agreements will carry forward. If for some reason the other divisions do not have come to an agreement by next July 31st of 2022, again, the provision will allow those staff members to have their existing contract carry forward. So whatever contract they have in place, the transition will allow them to become employees of the Provincial Education Authority with their existing contract, whatever that may look like. So I hope the member does not confuse the undertakings of Bill 64 with the provisions in Bill 45. Again, Bill 45 will be proclaimed at the will of the government when the government deems that necessary. So the reality is that that's certainly not the same undertaking as maybe July 1st of 2022. So just hopefully the member does not confuse the two issues and doesn't muddy the waters in that respect.
Mr. Altemeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I would like to clarify for the vast majority that don't have a contract, going into the new Provincial Education Authority in 2022, will back pay be part of these new contracts that will be provided to educators in the province if they haven't had a recent collective agreement? That's the last question.
Minister Cullen.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm just a little nervous there. The members jumping ahead in terms of maybe reaching conclusions on what ifs and hypothetical situations. The fact of the matter, come July 1st, 2022, whatever contract is in place, has been negotiated or gone through arbitration, whatever the process, those contracts will remain in place. And I'm not going to talk about the outstanding arbitration. I guess optimistic there'll be some of those agreements will be made prior to July 1st of 2022. But if they're not, the existing contracts will remain. So in terms of the members' comments about back pay, again, those are rulings made through the process, whether it be a collective bargaining process or whether it be a ruling by the arbitrator. So again, I'm not going to jump into put words in their mouth on those discussions. But I will say, historically, that's been the case when we've gone through the arbitration before. Historically, the arbitrator rules on the back pay, and members are paid that back pay based on those rulings by either the collective bargaining process or by the ruling by the arbitrator.
Mr. Altemeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move to the talking about transformation and the transition team, can the minister share how many full-time equivalents will be involved in this transition team in the Department of Ed?
Minister Cullen.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, certainly a lot of moving parts on this transformation reform project that we have underway. Clearly, I know the member has been focusing on the governance piece, that piece that will take us to July 1st of 2022. Obviously, that's one piece that does require considerable work, but hopefully the member will also be having a look at our larger transformation undertaking and relative to our strategy. And that's, again, based on student outcomes and teacher and leadership in the province. So there's a lot of work on that front, and we have announced quite a few committees on that front. So there's going to be a lot of work in that regard, looking at curriculum, looking at funding, look at the poverty and how that relates to education, inclusion and diversion. All of those fronts need a lot of work, and that's an undertaking that's going to take years. So, to the members' point, to the members' question, we do have 8 staff within the department currently dedicated to transition work. We have also allocated up to 28 extended FTE positions. These would be term positions over the next year to potentially 2 years to work on transition. We also have the capacity to bring in folks on an advisory basis. Again, whether those be short-term contracts or whatever the case may be. So I will say back to the 28 positions, those won't all be directly employed by the department. There could be exchange agreements or different other contracts put in place to bring those people in, again, on a term basis. So as we work through this over the next few months, we're going to put together a more detailed roadmap for everyone to see this fall. And I think that comprehensive roadmap will be a little more descriptive and more comprehensive so that the members and the public will have a clear understanding of what this rollout and the transition will look like over the next number of years. We as government have set aside $5 million for this initial rollout of the transformation. And certainly optimistic we can do some good things on behalf of Manitobans and on behalf of Manitoba students.
Mr. Altomar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to ask the Minister, there will still be demands, regular demands on the Department of Ed for the regular services that they provide to school divisions and to these new regional authorities. So of these 28 positions, are they coming from current FTEs in the department, or are these above and beyond what's currently there?
Minister Cullen.
Yeah, sure. Just to confirm, these 28 positions that I talked about, the extended FTEs, those are new positions over and above what we currently have in the department. Again, those will be term positions, potentially term contracts. Could be some interchange agreements with people that are already employed by school divisions or other areas. Where obviously we're seeking those with expertise in a number of the areas that we're looking at transformation. So there's a number of sectors involved in that for sure. But again, those will be term positions. We also will be bringing in consultants from time to time to add their expertise in some areas as we go through this. I will say we're still mindful as a department of the services and responsibilities that we have to school boards. So we're keeping an eye on that as well and making sure we're delivering on that. But I will also say, as we journey down this transformation road, we have to be clear and make some decisions in terms of what the role of the government in terms of the department itself will be, and the roles and responsibilities of the Provincial Education Authority. So I think we have a pretty good idea where we want to go, but there could be some fine tuning as we journey down this road. And And that's why we'll be listening to some experts along the way, and experts on education and other areas, organization, and so forth. So there might be some tweaking in the roles and responsibilities of the department versus the Provincial Education Authority. So again, it's a pretty big undertaking. I would say I'm not sure there's any provinces undertaken such a comprehensive approach to looking at education. There's a lot of pieces to this puzzle, but again, we're going to get the experts that have an eye on those various sectors, and we'll bring them in, and we'll work our way through that over the next few years. And it will take a few years because we are dealing with some very complex problems, and probably some complex problems that other governments have been afraid to look at. But I would say we've come to the point where you can only make excuses so long. And this is about providing better outcomes for our students. And I think nothing can be more important than that. And that's why we're embracing to take on these challenges and do some good things for Manitoba students. Not an easy task, not a task that is going to yield results overnight, but we're prepared to take on that challenge.
Mr. Altemeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We know Myers Norris Penny did some work regarding the Department of Ed's mandate and did a review on that mandate, departmental mandate review. Would the minister explain what changes have been made within the department as a result of NMP's work?
Minister Cullen.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, the Myers Norris Penny work goes back some time. It actually precedes when I came here, but Myers Norris Penny did some work in terms of, I'd say, the overall education system. So there was certainly a look at the organization structure here within the department. Would also include some roles, responsibilities around the department and sort of the mandate within the department. So a lot of pretty general work, I would say. And I would say that that work too, although somewhat general in nature, also helped inform part of the strategy that we have subsequently developed as well. So that I guess is in a nutshell what Myers Norris Penny did for us, some time ago.
Mr. Altamir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Did Myers Norris Penny provide you with or are you in possession of a formal document that will aid in the recommendations that they brought forward and putting them in place?
Minister Cullen.
Sure, thanks, Mr. Chair. So I guess the work that Myers Norris Penny undertook, I know there was some consultations with education stakeholders here in Manitoba. I know they looked at other options for organizational formats for the Department of Education. I think provided maybe some other options in terms of sort of roles and responsibilities of other jurisdictions were doing. They summarized that work and then provided, I would say, more options and potentially recommendations for government. But I will say that we have used that feedback and that engagement process to help make some decisions here as we go through the transformation. So I think it was a worthwhile exercise.
Mr. Altamir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would the minister be able to provide any reports or summaries generated by this M&P review that you just referenced?
Minister Cullen? Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'll have a look at what we've got and what we could share with the member on that front, and we'll provide what we can.
Mr. Altamir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the minister for that last response. That will be helpful. I'd like to move on to some questions regarding Bill 64. As we know, it proposes, Bill 64, the elimination of democratically elected school boards. We know that a number of school divisions, in their correspondence with many MLAs, when I say many MLAs, I mean MLAs from both parties that are in the legislature. I'm CC'd a number of those documents and correspondence with the department and with MLAs, and I've expressed some disappointment. I think disappointment is an understatement when it comes to the democratically elected part. That is something that was not expected. Certainly, we want to do our best for our kids, absolutely, right? We just have different avenues and different ways of seeing that, it seems. But one of the bedrock foundation pieces of this is, how is that local voice really going to be part of this? And that's a part that has a number of Manitobans very concerned. I will notice that, and I will bring to the minister's attention that every rural school division has communicated with myself. We've had many meetings regarding this, and they're looking for a way to get the government's attention on this. I know the minister has said that they are going to embark on a tour of Manitoba to get feedback. I'll remind the minister that that feedback was provided during the Ed review. And during the education review, we heard from many stakeholders that are not necessarily parents. They're community members, take pride in their school, feel that with Bill 64, that this will be something that they won't have an ability to contribute to anymore. And one of these really key stakeholders outside of, elected trustees are these community members, right? That see their schools as a manifestation and representation of their communities, not only in small town Manitoba, but also here in the city. So I want to get to a point where I want to ask the minister, when you're coming up with this plan, how was it determined that voices outside of parents will be included in how these regional catchment areas will operate?
Minister Cullen.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Member raised a lot of points there. Yeah, it sounds like he's trying to accuse us of over consulting with Manitobans, and I'll take that criticism any day. And we're going to continue to consult with Manitobans. Education is too important not to be consulting with Manitobans. So we're going to reach out on a number of fronts, and I hope the member does go to bettereducationmb.ca and have a look at all the fronts that we are working on. And we're going to be working on those fronts for a number of years. And, our government was hired to make improvements across government. And to leave out education and say that education isn't worthy of having a look at to make improvements would be disrespectful. So that's why we've undertaken the K-12 review. We've clearly learned a lot through COVID. We continue to learn through COVID. We've put together a strategy based on 4 pillars. And 2 of those are direct relationship to better student outcomes. We as government don't profess to have all the answers or solutions to improving education. That's why we're engaged in the process. And we're going to continue to engage educators and experts in the field to develop a better education system here in Manitoba. I know the NDP did not want to take on that challenge. As a result, we've seen our student marks slide, but we're taking on that challenge. The member talks about taking away elected officials. The K-12 report actually made recommendations about having a combination of elected and appointed officials. Quite frankly, that's exactly what we're doing in this regard. Right now, we have approximately 300 school trustees across the province. Our proposal here will have elected members at the school level through school community councils. So in fact, we will probably have in excess of 3,000 elected individuals that will be responsible for education at the local school level. So to come out and say that we're taking away the democratic elected officials is completely false. We in fact will have 10 times as many elected officials when it comes to education in Manitoba. So the premise behind that is completely false. And we hear the fear mongering coming out of school boards being extended across the province, a lot of times based on non-factual information. So it's extremely unfortunate. And I know the NDP are going to love to start spreading these non-facts as well and attempt to expand fear around the province. They've got to understand the reality here. I get the politics of it, and I get the games being played, but they're really doing a disservice to Manitoba parents. So we will continue to engage parents and the communities. We have established a task force. MLA Johnstone is going to be spearheading that task force across the province, getting feedback in terms of how the school community councils will work best, what their roles and responsibilities will look like, and the interaction they will have with the local principal in their local school. They will certainly have input into what the budget looks like or should look like, and what the priorities are for not only that school, but also for the region. And we still view this as a regional delivery of education in Manitoba. And clearly the elected school community council members will also elect a regional director, if you will, to serve on a provincial advisory committee to the minister. And a number of those individuals will also be appointed to the Provincial Education Authority. So these elected members will have a great deal to say and advice to provide when it comes to education in Manitoba. The role of school trustees has changed and is changing. We are going to province-wide collective bargaining.
The minister's time on that question has expired. Mr. Altemeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can the minister provide what the average pay of a school trustee is in Manitoba?
Minister Cullen.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the question from the member. I guess we could probably do a little bit of math here in terms of, what the, I would say the average salary would be. That might be a little more difficult. We do have a figure for sort of the all-in expenses related to school trustees. So, and that figure comes to about $11 million across the province. So we have about 320 or 30 or 10, 310 trustees across the province. I guess they're roughly expenses of about $11 million. So the member could do the math on that. Probably, it ranges across the province for sure. Probably anywhere between $3,000 to $4,000 below end to $30,000 per individual trustee or school board chair. So there is quite a variation there as well. But according to Frame, it's close to the $11 million mark. And I was just winding up my comments on the last question. Clearly, the role of the school trustees have changed over time. We are moving to a collective, province-wide collective bargaining mandate. So certainly that particular undertaking of school trustees has changed. We obviously, as a government, have signaled that we are going to move to more of a provincial funding for schools over the next few years. In fact, between this year and next year, a 50% reduction to the local property homeowners portion of funding for schools. So clearly that taxation component has and will be changing quite dramatically. So, I will say too, I know we do have a list of expenses related to school trustees and senior administration. And we've seen out of province travel, in the $200,000 a year out of province travel, and all associated other expenses that seem to be continuing to increase. And I guess our overall overarching view is that we can take some of this money in administration and put it at the front lines of the classroom to assist teachers. And quite frankly, that's what we've heard from educators, is more resources at the front lines. So I think if we take some of this money and the $11 million that trustees cost, that we can translate that into more teachers, more education and assistants, more clinicians, more resources for evaluators, more resources for mental health issues that we've talked about, and more resources for individuals with special needs. So that's certainly part of our focus, is to make sure we're putting the money where it is needed. And I would say if the member would have a look at some of the reports that will be landing on his desk very soon, he will note that there seems to be less and less money getting to the front lines in the classrooms than ever before. More money seems to be getting eaten up on the administration side. And quite frankly, that's heading in the wrong direction. And students and taxpayers are more deserving of their hard-earned money. And that's exactly what we're trying to accomplish by some of the changes that we are making.
Mr. Altamare.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The minister and his government have said that there will be $40 million in savings, and that's been throughout the media. Could the minister provide a breakdown as to where this $40 million in savings is found from eliminating school boards?
Minister Cullen.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I think first of all, I should correct the member's question or statement within the question. We have never said that we are going to eliminate, or pardon me, save $40 million from the elimination of school boards. First of all, any money would be, I would use the word redirected to the front lines. So this was never intended to be a cost-saving process. This was intended to redirect money directly to the front lines and streamline the administration process. The school boards trustees are only one component of that. And as I indicated in my previous answer, the frame report talked about trustees being an expense of $11 million. So certainly if we can take a considerable portion of that administrative expense, redirect to the front lines, again, we have tremendous resources there for teachers, educational assistants, clinicians, resources for technology, special needs, mental health that I would say our frontline educators are looking for. So also in terms of the new delivery model, obviously there will be a shared services component here where we believe we can garner savings. Certainly call it the unification of regions. I think we can streamline our delivery of services there as well. So overall, we view $40 million of money redirected to the classroom, and it's quite doable. We're working through the process of what the organizational chart will look like under the Provincial Education Authority, on what the regional delivery model will look like. And we're quite confident with a streamlined system, we can put an additional $40 million into the front lines of the classroom. We've done this with other areas across government, tried to streamline process and generate savings which can be redirected to other sources. And this is certainly the case in education, where we think we can help teachers and we can help students. And that's the undertaking. So I appreciate the question and look forward to another question.
Mr. Altemeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I still would like to have a detailed breakdown of that 40 million, and I would hope that the minister will undertake to provide some of that for us at a future date. I would like to move to the next part, where the minister in this government has also stated that Manitoba's administration costs are 48% higher than Ontario's. Would the minister provide any documentation or evidence of how that was determined or calculated?
Minister Cullen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We just wanted to double check exactly where we got that information from. So just to confirm for the members, the Manitoba admin costs are 3.1%. Ontario admin costs were 2.1%. And we did get that information from Stats Canada. It was the most recent Stats Canada data series. So we could provide that link to the member if he doesn't have it already. And that's where we got that information from.
Mr. Altamare.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would like the minister to provide a more detailed breakdown of the 40 million in savings. But having said that, can the minister provide factors or qualifiers that will be taken into consideration when appointing board members to the Provincial Education Authority?
me on it because like sometimes people
Sorry,
have
Colleen.
to reflect like.
Minister Cullen?
Good. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just pulling up the actual legislation as it pertains to the appointments or the members for the Provincial Education Authority. So here's how the legislation reads in terms of board expertise. It's section 41, bracket 4. In appointing a member of the authority board, regard is to be had for the need to ensure that A, each member has the knowledge, skills, and expertise in an area relevant to the needs of the board. B, the board as a whole represents a sufficient range of expertise and experience to carry out its responsibilities effectively. And C, the board as a whole represents the diversity of the people of Manitoba and the varied talents, perspectives, and ideas of people with different backgrounds and experience. So that's how the legislation reads. Clearly, we're looking to make sure we have qualified people there with a diverse background that can meet the needs of the board. I will say this will be a very, very important board as we go forward. The board will have oversight to what will be over a $3 billion budget. These will be order and council appointments. So we will be using our regular agency boards and commissions process. We will be seeking nominations for people that have an interest in serving on this particular board. And as we do with our current ABC process, again, we look for qualified people and we look to have a diversity of people represented on our boards as well. And I know we've made great strides in doing that over the last number of years. I also want to mention we do have a lot of task force entities we are putting together to address a number of issues in education. And certainly from there, we want to make sure we get a diverse background as well. And as an example, we have MLA John Stone actually engaging with parents and stakeholders and communities starting just next week on the parental engagement side. And I think we've put together a pretty diverse background of parents and educators across the province, and coming at it from kind of unique perspectives. So we're excited about that particular task force getting going, hearing from Manitobans, hearing how parents in the community can be really engaged at the local school level, and how we can make that operational and have a look at the roles and responsibilities that those school community councils will play and the role they will play. I'm also really looking forward to other issues which we're going to tackle, which are big issues, such as our poverty and education task force. Clearly, a lot of different communities involved in that, and looking forward to getting a diverse group of people and knowledgeable on that field and coming at it with different perspectives as well. It's certainly an issue that's been raised as it pertains to moving forward, but we can't use poverty as an education, as an excuse for not to make changes in education. In fact, quite to the contrary. Poverty, education, quite frankly, is a way out of poverty. And that's why it is so important that we get this right and how we can make changes to that. Clearly, it's not something that we as educators can resolve. It's something that we have to deal with, but we hopefully can be part of the solution. But when we look at poverty issues, this is a whole of government approach. And that's why we have to look at various other departments across government to see how we can deal with this poverty issue.
Minister's time has expired. Mr. Altamare.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm just trying to understand how we're going to have broad representation when Winnipeg region is going to be one of 15, and the Winnipeg region has the most diversity in the province. How will the minister ensure that a broad diversity of voices, especially from communities in Winnipeg, will be represented on this new provincial education authority?
Minister Cullen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we have to set the record straight here. Hopefully the member will maybe go back and have a second look at Bill 64 and the governance structure. So I don't want him to confuse the Parent Advisory Council with the Provincial Education Authority. Two distinct and two separate entities. So to go back, each school will elect a school community council. And then each of the regions, including Winnipeg, will elect one individual to the Provincial Advisory Committee, which will advise the minister. And vice versa, the minister can also ask seek advice from the Provincial Advisory Committee on different respects of education. So clearly we're going to have a lot of elected officials within Winnipeg, out of the 249 public schools there. We will have a robust operating structure, certainly within the schools to assist in those endeavors. And speaking of diversity when it comes to the school community councils, this is exactly the type of thing that we're asking MLA Johnstone and his committee to look at. how do we engage parents in the community in this, and how do we make sure that we get a diverse group represented at the school leadership level. And hopefully that will translate as well into the Provincial Advisory Committee. I will also say then, from a Provincial Education Authority perspective, there will be up to 11 board members appointed by the government. This is the agency that will be responsible for the administration of education across the province. And as I went through the list in the legislation, it clearly talks about diversity on that board. And that's clearly something that was mandated by legislation that our ABC process will review in making those appointments. And it should not be lost that the legislation also says that at least 2 members of the Provincial Advisory Committee will also serve on the Provincial Education Authority Board. So it's up to government to decide. They may select more than 2 members from that Provincial Advisory Committee to serve on the board. So I have every expectation that the Provincial Education Authority will be a diverse group. And I will say right now as well, we had a look back within Winnipeg of the diversity of the existing school boards. And only 6% of the current school trustees were of a diverse nature. So we're certainly diverse, underrepresented right now in terms of school boards. So that's something that we're trying to address. And that is something that Mr. Johnstone and his committee will be out in the communities and seeing how we can engage more diversity, certainly at the local school level. And the legislation really clearly spells out we will have diversity on the Provincial Education Authority as well.
Mr. Altemeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We know that there will be 6 to 11 appointees on the Provincial Education Authority. How often will these appointees change?
Minister Cullen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the legislation spells out that particular provision. So members can be appointed to a term of up to 3 years, but the maximum they can serve is a total of 10 years. And that is consistent with our ABC process as it exists. And that is based on previous recommendations by the Office of the Auditor General.
Mr. Altemeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bill 64 creates authority for the Provincial Education Authority Board, whose members are appointed by the Lieutenant Governor and Council to develop and implement policies about potentially sensitive curriculum, opening the door for some really interesting conversations that'll happen and leading to a potential censorship of educators. Can the minister explain what potentially sensitive content curriculum is or isn't? I can't hear you. It's not odd. They're an interesting crew. So, well, I don't get a whole sense of cohesiveness on that side, on that independent side.
I'm gonna go check in
Yeah.
on that zone.
When did you start in the clerk's office?
2 Januaries ago.
Nice. So when I started.
Yeah.
You have your license?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I got it last year.
Nice. Driving to school?
When we're in it, yeah.
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 Yeah, true.
They were trying to get more people to drive this year because they wanted like more space on the buses.
You no kidding? Yeah.
So they were trying to get everyone to drive.
Especially, yeah.
Yeah.
My kid's born in December and November, both my kids.
I was a November baby.
Oh, man. So, of course, we had to wait the
Oh,
longest,
yeah.
right? So, but anyway, it was good when they could drive.
Yeah. That'd be the worst too. You see all your friends getting it
Yeah.
and you want to go it so badly, but then you can't. It's just like,
And all the restrictions, too, right? It's
Oh,
different.
yeah.
Different from my day.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that, where you can just get in a car and drive like they do in the fields in Brandon. I mean, they just drove through those suckers like you wouldn't believe. Anyway, yes.
The lady that she washed her $26 million lottery ticket in the wash.
Like a local one? Or?
Yeah,
Really?
no, not here. It's in the States. $26 million lottery ticket. She I guess the laundry, had a laundromat. And so there's no proof.
Whoa. Well,
That'd be so crushing.
what do you say?
It was on CTV News,
Literally down the drain.
literally.
You know, I was just joking about driving through the fields. That's a Saskatchewan thing. It's not a Manitoba thing.
Deer is perked up there.
Minister Cullen.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Just doing a little history work here, history homework this morning. So thanks for allowing us to do that. I just want to be quite clear from the outset here. Even though there is some work that the Provincial Education Authority has to do in terms of providing a policy, a written policy, the fundamental piece that I want to leave with the members on the committee is that curriculum is still being set by the Department of Education. So I just want to make sure I highlighted that point, that curriculum is still being put forward by the Department of Education. So the other thing, when it comes to the history part, there's been a policy in place around sensitive content since 2007 within the department. That's been a policy, that's been the directive that we have provided, the government since 2007 has provided to school boards. So all we were doing under Bill 64 is bringing that policy forward. So in my view, this is being extremely transparent. And I want to make sure that committee members do take time to read section 144.1 right through to 144.4 in respect of this particular situation. So just to highlight this again, Bill 64 formalizes what was previously a department policy on sensitive content. It reinforces what happens in practice and supports parental choice relating to their child's education. The proposed legislation contains a requirement for the PEA to have a policy that requires schools to notify parents when physical or health education curriculum is being delivered that deals primarily and explicitly with human sexuality, substance use, and personal safety. If a parent elects to exclude their child from that portion of the course, the legislation requires that the student receive instruction in the potentially sensitive content by way of an alternative delivery. To further support diversity and inclusion, the proposed legislation requires the Provincial Education Authority to have a respect for human diversity policy that accommodates student activities, including Gay Straight Alliance or any other activities that promote a safe and inclusive environment. So hopefully that helps clarify the situation and the legislation around potentially sensitive content. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Altamare.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At this time, I'd like to invite the member from Tyndall Park to ask the next few questions.
Ms. Lamoureux.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to thank the member for Transcona for allowing me to ask some questions here, and thank the minister for his time today with the department. I'm referring to page 18 of the estimates here, and I understand that the department will be tracking the percentage of teachers trained in the Treaty Education Initiative. I'm wondering, why isn't this training required for all teachers?
Minister Cullen.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for allowing us some time on that. Thanks for the question from the member. I do appreciate that. A couple of things that I want to highlight in respect of this. Certainly, we do have established some targets in terms of training, and COVID hasn't helped us in achieving those targets, but hopefully soon we'll be able to get back on track. Clearly, we as government we're not hiring the individuals that are teaching these respective courses, but obviously we encourage school divisions to hire individuals that are willing to take the respective training. We're certainly funding that training. We take this responsibility very seriously. We do have an Indigenous inclusion director leader on our executive management committee that's working closely with respective school divisions on this front. I will say as well, in respect of where we're heading in terms of our strategy going forward, and I revert back to the K-12 report. If the member would have a look at that report, there is quite a number of recommendations in that report around how we engage the Indigenous community and how we can enhance education on that front. So we agree in principle with those recommendations. In fact, we're looking at an Indigenous Inclusion Directorate Advisory Council that would enable those discussions to take place. I think that's very important. The K-12 report also talked about elders and knowledge keepers in school initiative, which I think is really important. And I just reflect back on some of my time in justice and the difference that the elders and some of these knowledge keepers had, and the influence they had on individuals was quite remarkable. So I think there's valuable lessons that we can take from there, and I appreciate that recommendation in the K-12 report. And excited about remote learning strategy as well. I think that has a bearing in our discussion on Indigenous education. And then when it comes to Northern Manitoba, we know the challenges with recruiting teachers and retaining teachers in Northern Manitoba as well. And certainly there's some recommendations in the K-12 report in addressing that. So those are really important discussions that I know we will be having in the future. So I look forward to having those discussions, and we will be bringing forward a number of task force, if you will, or advisory groups to try to address some of those challenges as we move forward.
Ms. Lamoureux.
I'd like to thank the minister for his answer, and I think the ultimate goal is to ensure that all teachers have the training in the Treaty Education Initiative. And I'm just wondering if there's any sort of rollout plan, and correct me if I'm wrong, Minister, I'm wondering if there's any sort of rollout plan as far as prioritization. Or is there a focus on specific schools, a focus on specific subjects, if teachers teach geography, for example? Just what is the plan in ensuring some of the teachers do receive this education, ultimately all of the teachers receiving it? And just because it's on similar lines, what is the government hoping for as an acceptable percentage of teachers having this education?
Minister Cullen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate that question. We did have a look at our balanced scorecard and what we were striving for on this front. And, we're looking at a 95% uptake when it comes to the treaty education initiative. So that I would say is a pretty aggressive mandate. Our goal is to get 95% by 2023-24 year. I will say, sure, we've got some work to do on that front, but we've made a commitment to continue to measure that and continue to provide funding for that. To the members' questions, we are undertaking a curriculum framework review. I know the Truth and Reconciliation residential schools will certainly be an important part of that curriculum development, and we'll certainly look forward to seeing how that unfolds. So we're just in the process of getting that overall review team together to provide us some recommendations overall on the curriculum. The other piece I will speak to is going back to one of our 4 pillars when it comes to our Better Education Starts Today strategy. And one of the key pillars is about professional learning, education, and respect of teachers and leadership. So that is a very important pillar for us. We want to make sure that A, teachers are qualified, B, teachers are getting the upgrades they need, and C, that they have the resources to do the job in the classroom. So that's key for us. That's a very important pillar for us. So there's a lot involved in that. Clearly, the issue around treaty education is important to us as well. That will be a key component of that. But that, again, is not something that we're going to solve or resolve overnight. It will take additional work as we go through this transformation journey. I do appreciate the member's question on that front.
Ms. Lamoureux?
Thank you, and thank you, Minister, again for your answer. Just flipping to page 21 here, it's really important that schools are safe, respectful communities for all. And I'm wondering, how does the department currently handle a situation where safe, respectful workplace policies are breached, or when they are breached, sorry?
Minister Cullen?
Sorry, I'd like to get back to the member with an in-depth answer to that, but let me say that we work closely with school divisions on that front. And there's obviously policies in place to deal with these situations. There's another process that we as a department get engaged in when it comes to teacher situations, sometime in the teacher-student situation when that does occur. But primarily, this is handled through the school divisions. Obviously, we're in close contact with school divisions on this front when these issues do arise. So very cognizant of that. We're just trying to follow up on some respectful workplace policies and see what's required.
Order. The time being 12:30. Committee rise.